and start to dance, actually. My name is Sam Moon, and I'm Executive Director of MIT Enterprise Forum. This is the last in a series of 8 briefings that we've done out here. Last month we had John Chen, CEO of BlackBerry. We started in January with the CTO of IBM, giving us a crystal ball view of the future. Today I wanted to basically sit back and relax and look at reshaping in Hong Kong and having you guys part of the dialogue. So I have a great panel up here I'll introduce in a second. But first I want to introduce the person who's made all of this possible, Alan Nguyen from Hong Kong Science and Technology Parks. They've been our partner throughout this process, so thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think it works. Very warm welcome. Today is a beautiful day. Now we're in a very beautiful place. I hope there is going to be very interactive and a very good dialogue going on between the panels and also the audience later on. We have been running the MITEF series for quite many times, and each time it gets better. And today we have a powerful panel. Each of you carry a very important weight on themselves, and I hope today is also going to be as interesting and eye-opening, and also brings a lot of insights for each of you. This is exactly why we continue to work with MITEF. Sam has been very advocative of working together to bring the knowledge, to bring the sharing to the community, particularly the community in the science park. So I hope today we would have very good dialogue going on and continue our tradition. I will not take up even more time, so I will pass the mic back to Sam.
Okay, super. Thank you, Edwin. Before we start the session, I wanted to, I'm old enough that I've gone through a lot of business cycles, including the dot-com boom as well as the bust. All year I've been thinking if Hong Kong spent 10% of all the money and energy that we spent during that dot-com boom, what we could really do for Hong Kong as a global innovation technology hub. But also during that dot-com boom, I learned a lot of new acronyms and initials, and new ones still pop up every once in a while. But back then I learned B2B and B2C. But one of the things I want to do today to remind you of the dot-com good days is F to F, H to H. Does anyone know what that means? Face to face, hand to hand. So I'm going to ask you to stand up and introduce yourselves. 1 minute, people around you, okay? Exchange business card. Stand up. Simon says stand up. Up, up. Yes, Friday afternoon. Going to shake hands. It's called breaking the ice, folks. It's called breaking the ice. Aye. Got to work hard for this session. Okay, now Simon says that's enough. Hey, if we can sit down. Last Friday morning at an entrepreneurs event, I heard Charles Ng of Invest Hong Kong say there's 55 events for entrepreneurs, innovation, technology, innovation, blah, 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 last week, this week. So I'm glad you guys showed up. It's an important topic. But one little fact that I'll tell you before I start the session. I'm constantly learning myself. Fortunately, I have older kids, and if I have a problem with my phone, I just hand it to them. But more than that, things like LOL. For a good year, I'd be sending LOL, thinking lots of love, lots of That was early days before I learned laugh out loud. But I'm constantly learning. Let's hope this is a learning session as well. And a lot of that learning is going to come from you guys with your questions. So I've set the scene. Let me introduce our panel one at a time. We're going to start off with Dr. Michael Enright. You got bios of everyone, but 20 years ago, Victor Fung brought Michael Enright over from Harvard to do a major study of Hong Kong's competitiveness. I'm very pleased that he stayed in Hong Kong, and we're looking at redoing that plus. But anyway, I'm going to hand it over to Michael to kickstart this dialogue, and we'll go to each panel member. So Michael? Got it.
Thank you. Thank you, Sam. Yes, I've been in Hong Kong now. Actually, it's 18 years, but it's been a long time. Also great pleasure to be back here at the Science Park. I'm actually on the board of directors of a Science Park-based company, and I work with Astria and a number of the other organizations here, so it's a very familiar setting. I'll go sort of broadly and start and set a stage. With some things that you'd be familiar with, maybe a few things that you wouldn't. I mean, obviously, globally today, all advanced economies are looking at how to develop the knowledge, innovation, creative economy for obvious reasons. These days, if you can't generate revenue, if you can't generate profits through knowledge, innovation, creativity, and the intellectual property that allows you to generate, you're doomed to competing on costs. And competing on costs when we have a Chinese mainland, we have a Southeast Asia, other parts of the world in the game, is a real tough thing. Now, what I find quite interesting, though, is that in Asia, when people tend to talk about the knowledge economy or the innovation economy, almost invariably they seem to talk about developing new widgets for export. And that's an important piece of the puzzle, and it's a piece of the puzzle that I have great respect for. Again, when I was an undergrad back in the 70s, I was working in one of the 2 or 3 labs in the world where modern genetic engineering was invented. My first job was as a research scientist on Route 128. I've been an angel investor on 3 continents. I've advised governments in about 20 countries now in science and tech policy. So I have a great respect for the traditional laboratory R&D based innovation. But today, of course, the knowledge, innovation, and creative economy is much, much bigger than that. It's not just developing new widgets, it's developing new business models. I mean, what was Michael Dell's innovation? It was direct selling. It had nothing to do with the technology of the products that he was making. What was Bill Gates' innovation? It was really understanding the power of standards in the computer industry. That was his real innovation, and the ability to exploit that. So the knowledge, innovation, creative economy today, it's new business models, new logistics systems, new financial instruments, it's penetrating new markets, it's matching supply and demand on a global basis, it's setting up and managing cross-national organizations. And to my way of thinking, we should really be also looking at innovation as ways of identifying and solving some of society's problems. And we have issues. We have issues not just here in Hong Kong, but in China and Asia more broadly. And this should at least be one focus of our innovative activities. Well, what's required for the knowledge, innovation, creative economy? And again, you people are involved in it, so you know. The first, obviously, is the right people. And that's people who can think for themselves, recognize market needs, develop new ways of meeting those needs, and harness the resources to do so. Now, again, you're all familiar with that. What's less obvious often is that you don't need, or in fact, it's not useful to have groups of people who all think the same. Every study of the innovation process that I'm familiar with, including several that I've carried out, have indicated that it's the unplanned interaction that drives the innovation process. It's not, you don't get innovation usually from the people you would normally put in your diary. They think too much like you do. What you need is the person who has the complementary skill set, the complementary piece of knowledge that may come from a completely different discipline that you can't even anticipate. So one of the things that I do is I plan to have unplanned interaction. My email list, I divide into 4 parts, and once a quarter, I just send, here are the problems I'm working on, here are the issues I'm working on, to, 1/4 of my mailing list. And I get back fascinating insights and incredible amounts of help, and it's never from the people I would expect it from. It's always the people that have some unknown to me complementary piece of the puzzle. So it's not just the right people, it's the right mix of people as well. The second thing, of course, we need to have is information on what exists in our local environment, our international environment. As many of you know, the typical innovation today is either a new bundle of existing products and services, or a new product or service developed from an existing bundle of technologies. The typical time between the invention of a technology and its commercialization is still about 15 years, and that span of time actually hasn't decreased in over a century. So anything that's going to be commercially viable, the underlying technology already exists. It's a matter of, for the next 15 years, it's a matter of who's going to understand, pull together those pieces of information, add the insights on the productive side and on the market side. The third thing, obviously, infrastructure. We need the communication, we need the transportation, otherwise we get isolated and innovation suffers. The fourth is the right entrepreneurial environment. That means costs that entrepreneurs can deal with. It's availability of capital on reasonable terms. It's the types of amenities that attract skilled professionals. We were talking amongst the panel before on how this area has really taken off, not just as a science and tech hub, but the bike paths. And people come here on the weekends, and they hang out and they interact. The fifth is the right type of living and working space. And that's not just things like a science and tech park, but for the finance and business service sectors, which are actually incredibly innovative and creative, it involves high interaction CBDs. For people like architects and designers and artists, it means the right type of space where they can be inspired. It involves interaction. It involves public space that allows people to come together in both planned and unplanned interaction. And it involves social space, where people can, again, understand the community around them. Another thing that's required, really, for developing a knowledge, innovation, and creative economy successfully is recognition that one size doesn't fit all. Cities are different from suburbs. Suburbs are different from rural and semi-rural areas. Different locations have different cost structures that might price certain activities in or out of markets. Here in Hong Kong, we have a cost structure that's 8 or 10 times what we can have just across the boundary. Whereas in the US, a cost gradient of 25 to 30% is enough to drive certain activities outside of the big cities and into the suburbs and the areas beyond. All this means we have different histories, we have different skills, capabilities, so our creative, innovative knowledge economy is going to be different from Shanghai's, different from Singapore's, different from New York's or London's or Silicon Valley's. We can, Sam talked about our dot-com experience was different. In the US, companies went public, dot-coms went public without profits. In Hong Kong, they went public without profits, sales, business plans, or even operating websites. The day that, some of you are probably too young to even remember, the day that Tom.com went public, they did not have an operating website. Their website was under construction. So in Hong Kong, we tend to overdo some things, right? And that may be good. Another thing I'll just close on is there's a lot of misconception about innovation in Hong Kong. Hong Kong, and again, I've worked in all these places around the world. Hong Kong is actually one of the most innovative places I've ever been in. If you look at global standards of Global Innovation Index, Hong Kong ranks 10th in a virtual tie with the United States, Singapore, and Denmark, ahead of Canada, Germany, Israel, Korea, and Australia. The World Bank's latest Knowledge Economy Index, Hong Kong ranks about 18th ahead of Singapore, Israel, Japan, Korea, and a number of other economies that we normally think of as pretty innovative and creative. So we have a lot going on here, but obviously we have a lot of challenges. We have cost challenges, we have quality of life issues, we have the questions of how we create opportunities for young people, and I would claim we also have a lack of really a sophisticated enough discussion and debate about what the knowledge, innovative, creative economy is and how Hong Kong can really forge its own path in that world, and that's one of the reasons why I'm happy to be here today.
Perfect. Good, but yes, okay. Thank you, Michael. Before we open up for remarks, I wanted to have a few remarks from each of the panelists. Then we're going to open up for their questions. Rosana Wong is Executive Director of Yao Li Holdings, but more importantly, she represents the next second generation of a publicly listed company from a Hong Kong entrepreneurial family. But she's been in a tough industry, construction. They, in fact, built this building, and she owns one of the greenest hotels in the world in Shenyang called Holiday Inn Express. So, Rosana.
Thank you, Sam. That's very kind of you to give me such a great introduction. And thank you for Dr. Enright's the whole sort of overview of what's going on in our world. First of all, my name is Rosana, and I actually worked for and helped run a local homegrown building corporation right here in Hong Kong. And I'm a Hong Kong Chinese, born and bred here. So Hong Kong is a very special place to me. And I see great future here. And great future means great responsibilities that we all have, personally as well. The reason I'm saying that is because I see a lot of great opportunity arising for a while now, at least for the past 5 years, if not more, a decade. The reason being is because there's so many interesting things happening, and I really see there's this great imagination we put into all this. We can turn into possible things that we would like to do in our coming this coming decade here. The reason being is because if you look at it from a macro perspective, our world has been enhanced through technologies, and the world seems to be flatter, globalized, and then the communication is awfully easy. We don't need to travel anymore. Even if you travel, I was on a Google car 2 years ago, self-driven. I don't need to drive anymore. In fact, I've seen design sort of a meeting room inside a car. And that really is transforming our lives, our lifestyle, our community, our society. And that's really impacting us in a great way. And on top of that, if you look at it, narrow it down to our micro perspective in Hong Kong, we are situated in a very unique position. We're very small, but then again, we are very versatile. The entire infrastructure here in Hong Kong is well in order, and together we have a great motherland, China, not only supporting us, but backing us as well, and really place us in a great perspective in terms of Asia. And together we can actually create so many things, and we are so creative as a nation, a place in here. The unique things I see back home here in Hong Kong is the real entrepreneurial in all of us. And we love to create things, and we're so innovative. And for us, a very small example, for instance, we have disrupted ourselves as a corporation. We see the entire thing when it comes to the building industry. The way we built this auditorium then compared to it now is totally different, because we can use virtual design construction to visualize everything before we build. And for Sam was mentioned about our own hotel in Shenyang, as an owner, as a design build contractor, we basically try to save the energy in terms of the energy consumption that we actually used in our hotel. In comparison to the entire Hong Kong hotel industry, we save 58.5% of energy. And we also save 5.7% of water. And all this, a little bit of effort together with hardware and software. And that is something that we can all do and help and enhance our society. What we're doing right now, besides that, is actually looking into our human behavior to try to drag the energy down and even further. And by doing so, we're thinking to use gamify the whole things to engage the public to actually see whether we can actually do that further as well. All these we make, perhaps we can actually help build a better, a sustainable community and society in Hong Kong, if not in the world. Thank
Wow.
you.
Okay, Rosana, thank you. We feel inspired now. Our next panelist and speaker is Edwin Keh. A bit about him. He spent most of his career with major companies like Walmart, teaching them about Asia, running their global supply chain from China, before he was plucked into this little-known think tank where it's focused on textiles and actually looking at the future. There's actually lots of technologies coming from your institute. So I was hoping you might make a few comments as well.
Thank you, Sam. It's a pleasure to be here. I was thinking about as I was listening to everybody talk, why is it today that we are thinking about and talking about innovation, and why are all of you here interested in this process of innovation? How did we get to the point that we are today? And one of the things I think about too is that if you think about everything that we used since the time we get up this morning, the fruit that we ate, the computer and telephone that we are so accustomed to using, the clothes that we're wearing. If we sort of strip all those down, we are walking around like a United Nations full of stuff. Everything, all these things around the world serve us and allow us to live the particular lifestyle that we live. How did we get to this point? And I was just at a conference earlier this week, and I made this statement. I think how the defining moment in our current urbanized lifestyle in Hong Kong actually happened on February 21st, 1972. And on February 21st, 1972, Nixon went to China to visit with Mao. And as a result of that, we all know it's the opening of China and the beginning of the East-West trade, in which we make all this manufacturing events, all the activities that happened in the next 40 years from that. I keep reminding people, in February 21st, 1972, the world knows as much about China as we know about North Korea today. It's a very different, tense world in which there was a Cold War going on. And from that point to where we are right now, in which we have this huge development in China. 75,000 people lived in Shenzhen in 1972. Today, there's 15 million permanent residents and another 5 million floating residents in Shenzhen. First time I went across the border to Shenzhen, there were 5 blocks that had paved roads on it. Right? Canada moved in next door to us. Australia moved in next door to us. Nobody's from Shenzhen because nobody is from Shenzhen, right? That created all this wealth for China and also for Hong Kong. So for the last 30 years, we've been banking on this outsourced manufacturing. We were the labor component to all that consumer product that was going through, and that made a lot of our parents very wealthy. But we reached an inflection point, right? And we're living through that inflection point. And that inflection point is why we are all talking about what we're talking about today. And the inflection point happened when China went from a $1 trillion economy to a $7 trillion economy. So all of a sudden, according to Morgan Stanley, McKinsey, there's going to be about 300 million new Chinese consumers that didn't exist a generation ago. So all of a sudden, 300 million middle-class Chinese consumers are going to start consuming. So people who used to manufacture this stuff are now consuming this stuff. And so all of a sudden, there's the middleman role that we played in this last 40 years of development is going away because the flow is now going the other direction. And by the way, China doesn't need us anymore because they all can speak English as well as we do. So what's the new role that we play? And if we can't be the labor component and create wealth, maybe we can be the knowledge component that create wealth. And I think this is one of the things that drive us. We're very good at the labor component. We're trying to figure out what it takes to be a knowledge economy. I think that, I hope that's the motivation. That's what I do. I run a research center for the government, and we're trying to figure out value-added propositions that are service-based, that are innovation-based. What does it take to be an innovative economy? What does it take to create value? And I'm sure there are other panelists who can add to that, and I certainly would like to hear the questions from all of you. But I think it's around things like how can we communicate effectively, how can we collaborate efficiently as a team, how can we increase our appetite for risk, so that we can, because innovation in startups means that 90+% of efforts that we try not going to work out. So in our sort of shame-based system, can we deal with that? Can we deal with that mindset shift? So I'm curious to hear about what you're thinking about, because I want this afternoon, I think like Sam, I want it to be relevant to you. So I'm looking forward to some great questions so that we can have a rich conversation. Thank you.
Brilliant, Evan. Thank you. Now, I thought having an architect who has been doing urban planning for probably 20 years, where you built brand new cities across China and Indonesia, actually also make some comments in terms of this topic.
Stephen Townsend, Regional Director of Urban Design Planning at Gensler, a large American corporation that actually one of our specialties is redefining workplace. I'm not centered in that because I'm more on the larger scale, but it's an element that has a great effect on how we're designing cities these days. And I'll get into, I hope you have some questions about that, but there's a few things I'd like to touch on. One of them is interaction. Today, we're seeing technology allow us to actually work at home for a large part of our daily activity. We do it for a lot of reasons. For comfort, some people are more innovative in spaces they're more comfortable in, and so it puts a whole different twist on how we provide space for people to interact. Yet the need for interaction will never go away. Interaction is going to be very important as we develop new technologies and new industries and new businesses we can't even imagine that will exist 10 years from now. This is truly Hong Kong's opportunity. When I first moved here 15 years ago, one of the reasons why I moved here is because I thought it was one of the most unique and probably highest quality of life cities in the world. I mean, what other place on the planet has built a city like this has and done it so efficiently and effectively with cash left in their bank accounts? That, in a way, is innovation to begin with. So why are we limiting ourselves? Why aren't we actually getting ourselves together and providing through proper interaction and leadership? Why aren't we inspiring each other to create new technologies focused in an environment where we live so comfortably close together and so many diverse people live together? Second aspect is collaboration. Michael was suggesting a little bit in his talk about how different types of people get together. Truly, even in the design world that I represent, architecture and planning, Dr. Enright and I have worked on a number of projects together because economic future, long-term thinking, and future-proofing is an essential part of credible city design these days. And we do it also with environmentalists and a number of people, specialists that come into our process to create better cities to live in, including people like yourselves coming into the public process, which is very important that Asia starts to engage in these days. So that's innovative. And I guess the third thing is quality of space and quality of life. Sam and I were in the car guard just a little while ago. We were thinking we'd come inside and kind of do a little debrief before this session. And the buildings here are very beautiful, don't get me wrong. They're very nice buildings. But it was one of those days where how wonderful it would be just to be sitting outside. And so we stayed in the courtyard. And you see, that's something we're not paying close enough attention to. The quality of space. Maybe it diminishes over time, that we don't need as much office space, or that office space changes. But the quality of that space that provides and inspires interaction is the key to future innovation in almost every industry: design, technology, finance, government. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Okay, and our final panelist, speaker, David I, representing City U, but also representing Stanford's technology innovations for licensing to industry and governments for Greater China. So, David.
Thank you, Sam. Very glad to be here with my fellow panelists and with Michael. Wonderful topic here. And I moved to Hong Kong just 6 months ago after having spent the previous 30-some years in Silicon Valley, working, studying, and all that. So, and also when I was working at Stanford right before this job, including now, there's just a constant stream of people, especially international visitors, asking what does it take to create another Silicon Valley? What does it take to replicate the kind of a high-speed, high-quality interaction that would lead to innovation? And to that, I often point to some rather disappointing view to my visitors that I would direct them all the way back more than 150 years ago. There was a 1849, a critical event happened a bit before February 22nd of 1972, but that's when they discovered gold in Northern California, in the Nevada Sierra mountain range. And very similar developmental path to Shenzhen only 150 years ago was that the year 1848, the city of San Francisco had a grand total of 2,000 residents. And 1 year later, they got 100,000. So San Francisco was literally transformed into a modern, big metropolis. Remember, back in those days, 100,000 people was a really big number. So why was that significant? Even until today, there have been quite a few studies shown officially that in Northern California, where San Francisco Bay Area or the Silicon Valley is located, it is a region within the US that's perceived to be the most fair and highly competitive place for all kinds of people, for immigrants. That it has the least amount of discrimination, and it is absolutely true. I was born and raised in Taiwan through undergrad days, and went to the US back in 1980. And I can really tell you that living in Northern California, not even once would I even hesitate to enter any space at all. The most exclusive space, high-end restaurants or whatever, and people just treat you like normal human being. And it's also a space where people really don't ask about where you're coming from, your family history, or even, pedigree is somewhat useful, but what much more important to people is that, do you have the stuff? Can you make things happen? What can you do? And therefore, all kinds of strong competitors just would like to gather on the stage where their talents can be most appreciated, where they feel that they can also make it as long as they work hard. So that's sort of a cultural element of it, which is actually very, very hard. And I used to have a slide, and I eventually took it out of my standard slide deck, showing my rather pessimistic view about Japan as an entrepreneurial space. And specifically because I felt that Japanese culture, in terms of that, in that respect, is really, really hard to change. And they even until now, in terms of their treatment to women is still very depressing. And it will take quite a few generations. But let me also fast forward 150 years to today. The reason I came here to Hong Kong and decided to make Hong Kong my future home is because of the opportunity. And because of I also saw Hong Kong as a wonderful city to live in. And this is just like San Francisco Bay Area. This is where people mingle. This is where people try to prove themselves. And the kind of diversity represented in this city, the kind of diverse ideas, and the motivation to change is very, very evident in this city. And specific now to my role at City University, I'm the Director of Knowledge Transfer at City University. But as Sam alluded to, I also wear another hat because City University, after I came, signed an agreement with Stanford University where, well, City University maybe not the top ranked university in Asia, but we have the relationship and also we have the trust. So we're asked to help Stanford University to market Stanford technologies to Greater China. And I think that's actually not an accident. Rather, I really do see Hong Kong having a very significant role in the whole world of technology or new idea movement. Why do I say that? If you think about this, for other standardized standardized merchandise or products, it is true, Hong Kong has lost pretty much the middleman status or the gateway status in terms of helping China establish a gateway connection to the outside world, because people speak very good English and there are a lot of people helping them so they can go direct without having to go through Hong Kong. It's entirely different because I'm in this business and work at it every day. When you talk about technology and technology transfer, technologies are very, very complicated. There's nothing standardized about it. You cannot facilitate a very easy, quick and easy technology transfer contract, especially when you consider the complicated legal enforcement environment. Where I came from at Stanford University, they were very, very, very cautious when it comes to making any kind of technology transfer agreements with any parties within China. Because the very first question is that, okay, which law will govern the contract? Chinese law? No way. They simply will not go for it. Okay? But then the Chinese party says, US law, we have to go to New York, we have to go to California to litigate, forget it. American courts are infamous in some sense. People are just very scared of that. Well, Hong Kong has an outstanding rule of law history. Hong Kong has a very clean, very transparent judicial system. And Hong Kong also has a wonderful, for instance, arbitration center with a lot of internationally well-trained, well-respected listed arbitrators, including a bunch of arbitrators very experienced in IP or intellectual property issues. And that makes people feel comfortable. And on top of that, if you think about the following, well, I used this example the other day, and a friend of mine approached me saying, you were too harsh. And I said, I agree, but sometimes in order to make the point across, a little bit drama, exactly. If you think about this, Hong Kong may not have produced very many Nobel Prize winners. Well, this auditorium is named after one. But at the very least, in Hong Kong research universities, we have plenty of researchers who can totally understand the theories and the technologies represented by those Nobel Prize winners. If you move and talk about the relative concentration level if it moved to any institution in China, you're going to see that representation, that percentage number drop very quickly. In other words, I don't think that we need to get a whole lot of Nobel Prize winners out of Hong Kong. What we need is a lot of good, solid technology developers that can actually take the state-of-the-art technologies that can actually package additional value-added services, high-value services, and perhaps do bundling. So in both a legal perspective and also technological development perspective, Hong Kong can play an excellent, still, middleman and gateway role when it comes to China. I deal with the Chinese entities, inland Chinese entities, all the time, and I understand that they often have a frustration that to them, they understand a little bit about their local technological demand, but they don't know how to go out to the rest of the world looking for existing technologies. And they don't have the know-how, they don't have the sophistication, they don't have the high value legal, accounting, and professional services to help them negotiate a good, solid technology deal. And if it's a single source deal, that's complicated enough. If you consider these days, a lot of the technological movements involve multiple packages, multiple sources of technology. These are typically fairly complicated deals and really would take significant professional help. And they're simply not available, not in inland China. But here, I think Hong Kong, we have a great opportunity to do that, and therefore I question, I'd like to caution some of the policymakers, don't have to think of Hong Kong as an end-all kind of a one-stop answer to all the questions, all the problems in the world. We don't have to be that. All we need to do is to carve out a meaningful kind of a service and role in this overall global and the total value chain creation. We don't have to have an end-to-end solution and having to argue that all the jobs created must be located in Hong Kong. That's not being realistic. You know, when you think of manufacturing, how many entrepreneurs would like to base their mass manufacturing facilities here in Hong Kong? So we got to be smart about what values we can add and make sure that those are high value items that we can add and not try to monopolize the whole value chain. And I think that Hong Kong has a bright future as long as we have smart people like what we have both on stage and off stage here.
Okay. All right. Thank you, David. I have a Santa helper. His name is Jamie. Jamie, raise your hand. He's not a terrorist. He's a friend. I can ask a dozen questions and we can end it that way, but I'd much rather the questions come from you guys. If you need me to come out there to ask the questions, I'll do that. So raise your hand or catch Jamie's eye and get as many questions in as possible. So who's brave enough first? Nobody? There you go, right up there. And try and direct your questions to the entire panel rather than individuals if possible.
Well, now I came in a little bit late, so maybe I missed that part. But what I'm curious to know, there's a lot of discussion about Singapore versus Hong Kong.
Okay.
And what are your perspectives on those?
All right. Let's start with Michael, since you live in both places. And then Rosana, you travel and do business in both places.
Yes, I have one base in Hong Kong, which I've had for 18 years, and I've had a second base in Singapore for 8 years. And in fact, the first work that I did in Singapore was in 1986 for the Economic Development Board in Singapore, and I was helping run their annual strategy sessions where they had their however many hundreds of people from all over the world back in Singapore for their week of strategy sessions. And at that time, Philip Yeo was chair of the Economic Development Board, and he asked me as chair of EDB, what can I do to foster entrepreneurship and innovation in Singapore? I had a small question. So I took a step back, I looked up at the room, and I said, fire all these people. I said, in Singapore, you take your best and your brightest, and you get them nice jobs with big multinationals, or you get them nice, relatively cushy jobs with government. Who needs to be entrepreneurial? People initially become entrepreneurial because they have to, more so even than they want to. And then it becomes embedded in society, and that's when everybody wants to do it. And Singapore is still that way. In 1997, I wrote a piece for the Far Eastern Economic Review when Hong Kong was considering being more directive in government policy to direct the economy, and Singapore was saying, well, should we be more open like Hong Kong? The two systems are completely different. Hong Kong is driven by private sector entrepreneurship, where people don't spend huge amounts of time, looking for a handout from government or anybody else, because they're not going to get it in general. And that they're forced to make their own way, they're forced to identify market opportunities, they're forced to make the interaction happen. In Singapore, you have the bulk of the economy, in terms of anything that's innovative, is foreign companies. And the local government and the government-linked companies provide the infrastructure. And you'd be extremely hard-pressed after 30-plus years of trying to find really innovative Singapore solutions to problems. They have lots of people with white coats walking around. Very little real innovation goes on there. And not to bring other issues into the fray, and I have no particular position on the wisdom or lack of wisdom of what you're seeing in various parts of Hong Kong, but over the last 2 months, we've seen more initiative by young people in Hong Kong than I've seen by young people in Singapore in 30 years. So I think Hong Kong is very different from Singapore.
Rosana, anything to add from your perspective? Working both ways.
Thank you. Yeah, I tend to work over there in Singapore, have our business, and that was since late 2007 till now. I really concur what Dr. Ian was actually saying. Basically, the major differences between Singapore and Hong Kong is we have creativity, we have entrepreneurship, and more to the point, they have a term in Singapore, I don't know whether you heard of it before, it's called gag su, means they're really worried to lose. And that is something to stop them being innovative, to try. We all need to try. Without trying, then we are not actually taking us, leading us to the future. So I see that is probably the major difference between the two places.
Edwin, anything to add?
I think it's not a zero-sum game. Right? We don't have to win at the expense of somebody else losing. One thing to that, and then I think oftentimes just because it's two small cities, it doesn't have to be. It's an unfair comparison. Why should we be like? Why should we want to grow up to be like Silicon Valley? We should be something completely different.
I agree.
And so, in one sense, the comparison is somewhat faulty to begin with. So if we take that away, and maybe the question behind the question would be, how can we be as innovative, be the most innovative place possible? I think if that's the question, then it's all these things that we talk about. The resources, internal resources, the policies that we make. All those things that would drive us so that we can switch our thinking over to a much more knowledge-based, innovation-based thinking. Okay, thank you. I hope that's helpful as an answer.
Well, one of my specialties is looking back at the 30,000-foot level. And I think if, like it said earlier, this is not an end game for one place. It isn't at all. If you add the highly intellectual communities of Manila in the Philippines and Kuala Lumpur and now Jakarta as it emerges into its new economic promise. The intellectual innovation potential, when you add all of those Asian cities together, of course, why would we ever want to create another Silicon Valley? It would be far too limiting. we should really start to collaborate. And maybe Singapore's offer is that, yes, government can take care of a few things, and maybe Hong Kong government doesn't take care of enough. But with the business sense that we have, and with the ambition of these other countries coming into play, this is the time to reap the rewards of the intellectual potential that's coming out of Asia and compete with the rest of the world, not each other.
Yes, a very good question and very good points shared by my colleagues on stage. If we take the question and elevate it to the next level up, I think a fair question to ask and to discuss is that how do we position regions or countries like Singapore, like Hong Kong, like Taiwan, relative to the background of China's development. And I see the same kind of, what I'm concerned about is that I'd like to encourage policymakers to really start planning, not driven out of their fear of losing their competitiveness, which is what I've seen too much of, both here and in Taiwan. A lot of current discussions all have to do with the fear of losing out, quote unquote, to China. Well, I think it's quite obvious that there's nothing that any of these regions can possibly do to prevent China from winning. I mean, simply in terms of the scale, in terms of the capacity, in terms of the readiness, China will be the biggest gorilla in our backyard for as long as we can see. So the right question to ask is how do we play a really high value added role in this and make it a truly a win-win-win scenario, including all the regional economies, including all your neighbors. And after all, the basic premise of any kind of an international trade or collaboration is that you want to trade based on what you have, what you can do the best. And therefore, when you can deploy your resources to the most intelligent level, the most competitive level, and you trade, you compare, you work with other partners, then everybody wins. All the citizens, all the residents should win in that sense. So that is...
Yeah. Go ahead.
I couldn't agree with you more. I was just reading Malcolm Gladwell's book, David and Goliath, and Goliath never had a chance, right? Because David was much more nimble and much more smart in what he was doing. And I think that's the role we should, and that's the how we should think about ourselves. In 3 occasions, one is the United States, once in China, in Beijing, and once in Hong Kong, the last 2 weeks, I asked the same question of the audience. I said, name the top 3 universities in China. And I always get the same answer. Beijing University, Tsinghua University, and Fudan University. And my answer to them is wrong, wrong, and wrong. The top 3 universities in China today, by global ranking, is the University of Science and Technology of Hong Kong, the Hong Kong University, and the Chinese University of Hong Kong. So why do we think of us, why do we have this inferiority complex about ourselves? I mean, 10 years from now, the answers will be different, right? And I'm glad I got out of Beijing in one piece for playing, asking that question. But today we have the advantage. I mean, we have the resources and we have the intellect and we have the smart guys and gals in the audience. And so let's do something about that, and let's stop worrying about losing, and let's figure out how we can win.
Michael, you wanted to add?
Yeah. There are a number of things that Singapore actually does quite well that we actually should learn from. One is openness to the outside. We think of Hong Kong as a very open place, but try to be a foreign doctor practicing in Hong Kong. Try to be a foreign lawyer practicing in Hong Kong. Singapore has, across the professions, been much more open to international talents to help drive the economy there. On education, if you look, you drive around Singapore, the main big places along all the major roads, they're all schools, right? They've taken the best pieces of land, the most prominent places, and they've invested in education there. And they've invested in the local education system, and they've made everybody have a stake in it. In Hong Kong, we have a situation where a number of our civil servants under their contracts can have the Hong Kong government and the Hong Kong taxpayers pay for their children to be educated in the US, UK, Australia. In Singapore, if you're a Singaporean citizen, you're not allowed to send your child to an international school. You have to send your child to a local Ministry of Education school. And that means that even the upper ranks of society in terms of socioeconomic status have a vested interest in the education system from the beginning right through university. In Hong Kong, we have a system, even though we have a number of very good universities. Being on the faculty at the University of Hong Kong, I tend to think University of Hong Kong's ranking is a bit overrated in some of these things. Sorry. But in Singapore, everybody is bought into the local education system because they have to be. In Hong Kong, we have too many ways of the elites being able to isolate themselves from what the rest of society experiences. And if we look, 10, 15 years from now, it's not, the tycoons that are going to be the source of wealth in the Hong Kong economy. It's going to be the professional, upper middle class, the well-educated people of Hong Kong.
Okay. One plus for Hong Kong, we don't have military service. I hope you had a question back here.
Yes. Could you comment on the premise of, due to the nature of Hong Kong, open economy, efficiency, open mindset, global, a lot of nationalities based in Hong Kong. Could you comment that Hong Kong would be more suitable as a global center for global business versus other centers like China, which is more the gravity, it pulls down to the local level than the global?
I'll start on this one. That's fine. It's on. Okay. Actually, back in the late 1990s, I was in the late. Yeah, we're on that. In the late 1990s, I was involved in doing a fairly extensive scenario analysis for the Hong Kong government on its sort of position in the world. And what we determined was something that I've done dozens of scenario analyses for companies and governments around the world. This was the only one that I've ever done where the answer in every scenario about what you really needed to do well was exactly the same. And it was that Hong Kong always had to spend its marginal dollar of resource or erg of brain power on making sure it had its international linkages. The reason, again, I won't go into the detailed description, but the idea was, well, if China was going to continue to develop, open up to the rest of the world, the only way that Hong Kong could even stay ahead or even compete with and be a major city in China was to ensure that its international linkages were as good, if not better, than the major cities in China. And because China itself and the cities in China are such a challenge 24/7, that actually Hong Kong has a number of advantages in doing that. If you flip it around, if China decided ultimately to be more closed to the rest of the world, stagnated as a result, then Hong Kong's international linkages would be its lifeblood. Right? It would be its only source of economic vitality. So Hong Kong prospers as long as it is well integrated with China, but as long as it's well integrated with the rest of the world. Right? Obviously, you try to do both. Where at the margin would I put the resource? International linkages for Hong Kong, hands down. But I'll just make another comment on that. Another thing that I find, okay, again, I have my position at University of Hong Kong, and I have a 10-person consulting firm. We do economic strategy consulting. We do 60+% of our work in the Chinese mainland. And we do that from Hong Kong. So why not do that from Shanghai or Beijing? Well, if 60% of my work was in Shanghai, I'd move to Shanghai. If 60% of my work were in Beijing, I'd move to Beijing. But we work literally all over China. We work in, a given year, we might work in 8 or 9 of the major cities. And if that's the case, it's actually much better to be located in Hong Kong, because the information flows between those individual cities in Hong Kong is actually better than the information flows between those cities. Who goes in and puts in the first good hotel, the first mixed-use complex with office and residential and all the things to make a Chinese city internationally usable and user-friendly? It's Hong Kong developers. If you want to find representatives of the major cities and provinces of China, there are only 2 cities you can find them all, basically. One is Beijing, but that's all political. If you're interested in the economics, they all have offices or representatives here in Hong Kong. And we find that that information flow, the business information flow, is such that we often have clients in Shanghai that call us up in Hong Kong to find out what's going on in Wuhan or Qingdao or Chongqing or Chengdu.
Okay. Other people from the panel want to offer? Yeah, David.
Maybe I'll use my own example to illustrate. When I made the decision to move to Hong Kong, I didn't even have to think about, well, could I adapt to the new life in Hong Kong? You know, having spent the last 30+ years in Silicon Valley, because I had already traveled to Hong Kong a bunch of times. I worked for a Hong Kong-based public company. It's a no-brainer. But imagine if my decision were to move anywhere, Beijing, Shanghai, or anywhere else, I would immediately have to really stop and think about it for quite a bit. Not the least will be a concern over the information flow, over the concern of certain information. For instance, I like to use Google services. I'm sorry. I'd like to have my information access to whatever information I feel like it. And I don't have to tell anybody. I don't have to worry about other people thinking or judging me based on what kind of information websites I access. And I don't have to worry about if I talk to my friends in a certain way, when I ever get into trouble. I don't have to worry about my association with some of my friends. So by now you probably know my political affiliation or political view of certain things. But to be truly international, to allow truly free movement of ideas, you really have to embrace certain basic principles. And I find that to be really a valuable asset for a city like Hong Kong. And I certainly hope whatever we do, we continue to embrace diversity, we continue to embrace true freedom, and to the betterment of the overall Chinese society.
Okay. Other questions? All right. Can you get the mic back here, James?
I think a more interesting comparison is not Singapore, actually it's Townsend, right across the border from us. So if we look from after 1997, from the point of view that the government appointed Professor Tian to start the Science and Innovation Plan for Hong Kong, right? And what do we have? We have ITC, we have a lot of funding, we have the cyber port, and then we have Science Park Phase 3, and we are about to have a Science Bureau. But if you look at the actual output, the result, we don't have anything significant developed in Hong Kong, right? But look at Shenzhen from that time, last 15 years. You have all these technology powerhouse, Huawei, Zhongxin, CTE, BYD, Myray, all these people, all these companies emerge. And you also have a high percentage, if I remember correctly, about 1/3 of the GDP, really from high tech. Now we have very little percentage of R&D as a percentage of GDP. Right? So you look at the two systems. So you wonder what's happening in Hong Kong. Can we actually innovate? I mean, I can more confidently think that I see a Silicon Valley emerging across from the border, not here, but in Townsend. So I wonder what's your view on this last 15-year development and seeing, do we draw any lessons? Can we learn anything from the result? I mean, the ranking might be high, all this innovation ranking and all this thing, but even so, we have the best university in Hong Kong, but I can tell you I'm teaching Chinese youth. 95% of my grad student is from China.
Okay. All right. If I could also add, in terms of your comments on that, what if, as a business organization rather than government, you're talking all the government initiatives, and I don't think anything ever happens with government initiatives anywhere in the world. It needs to be private sector held. But what if, I'm adding to the question, we added Shenzhen, Zhuhai as part of our ecosystem? What if we had an APAC travel card just for entrepreneurs, so you're not waiting in any line going to the border? You've got a new road going to Zhuhai. What if? So just add that. Michael, we've been starting with you each time, but give some room for the others to make some interesting comments too.
Okay, well, this is one that I'll be pretty blunt on. Remember before I said that our costs are 8 to 10 times in Hong Kong what they are just across the boundary? I referred obliquely in the U.S. that some activities get pushed out of the cities with a 25 to 30% cost gradient. Quite specifically, and I've studied this all over the world, the main R&D activities that drive the type of innovation that you're talking about, a 20 to 25% price gradient anywhere else in the world is enough to drive them out of the major cities and into the suburban areas. You don't see those big types of companies there in San Francisco, you see them in Silicon Valley. You don't see them in Boston, you see them on Route 128 or 495. You don't see them in London, you see them along the M4. You don't see them in Paris, you see them in the crescents to the north and south. You don't see them in the heart of Munich, you see them in the outskirts of Munich. So trying to engage in that type of quote-unquote innovation and expecting that it's going to have a significant impact on Hong Kong's economy is actually pushing a very large rock up a vertical hill for all intents and purposes. One reason is that actually, if you look in terms of highly educated people and the returns, economic returns per person and per square meter, they are much higher in finance, they're much higher in professional services, they're much higher across even the trading sector than they are in research and development activities. When I was working as a research scientist on Route 128, I was getting paid 1/8 what someone with a similar level of training to what I had was getting paid on Wall Street, and the market, it turns out, was not wrong. We don't have those types of activities because we actually have activities that return higher amounts per person and higher amounts per square meter dominating our economy. We have manufacturing is now 1.8% of GDP. And if you were to take it as tech manufacturing, even to be generous, and I'm on the board of directors of what's considered one of Hong Kong's leading tech manufacturing companies, it would be 1/3 of that. So we're talking about 0.5 to 0.6% of GDP. And even if we were successful in generating the type of company you're talking about, they would put their headquarters here, they would put their manufacturing across the border, they would transfer price so that very little in the way of profit wound up in Hong Kong, and the owners who would be based in Hong Kong would receive all their remuneration through dividends and through capital gains, so they wouldn't even pay tax in Hong Kong. So, you know, at some point in time, we have to think in Hong Kong, what should we be investing in? And what type of innovative economy we should have here, because Hong Kong is just very innovative, but it's not, it doesn't tend to be innovative in the way that gets defined by have we generated certain numbers of large high-tech companies. Right? It's innovative in many other ways. in terms of finance, in terms of management, in terms of trading, in terms of linking international flows. And what I would claim now is that what Hong Kong has done historically, and has done quite well at, has been identifying sources of demand anywhere in the world and identifying sources of supply, mostly in Asia, and having that supply meet that demand. What modern technology has done is absolutely supercharge people's ability to do that. And that's one of the things that's a huge opportunity. As before was mentioned, the flat world. In the flat world, you're either the flattenor or you're the flattenee. You're either driving the steamroller or you get steamrolled by it. And what Hong Kong hopefully has is the ability to have the people, to have the organizations that can make those pieces come together. But that's a different form of innovation and knowledge economy than people tend to define.
Okay. Who wants to comment next? Edwin's been nodding his head. Steve?
Yeah, for the last 7 minutes, I'm just sitting here thinking about when I was growing up as a young professional dealing with technology companies that were wanting large floor space and manufacturing sitting right below their offices in 28 in Palo Alto, California. That's not going to happen here. There's no way. And the part of it is that, not to sound elitist about it, but I think the people that are growing up here, because of their international educations and because of their exposure to the world that perhaps Singaporeans aren't getting, or maybe some of the people in the mainland aren't getting, we have, I think, a potential of reaching a new threshold with new technologies, and that we become more designers, not researchers and developers, that we actually could be leading new technology. You know, we were just sitting in the office the other day talking about flu inoculations. 10 years from now, we may not have flu inoculations because technology in medicine is going to take a leap forward that you just cannot imagine. So where does that innovative thinking start? It starts with people who are extremely concerned about quality of life. Is the quality of life in Shenzhen for a top-level executive in a technology innovative company in Shenzhen, is it as good as living in central Hong Kong? No. Well, I've been so many places in both cities. So that, I think, is where we probably should be focusing our direction. What is the opportunity that is unique to this setting and taking and maximizing that?
Okay. Edwin.
So the center I run actually is funded by the Innovation and Technology Fund. So I should not bite the hand that feeds me, but I will. Well, first of all, I think it was interesting. All the companies that you talked about actually are Hong Kong listed companies, right? They're operating somewhere, but they're all listed in the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. So we do attract a lot of these types of companies to have presence, financial, physical presence in Hong Kong because of the ecology that we have. We've all talked about this. You know, Hong Kong came late to the whole research and development game, right? And until the 1990s, I would say, we didn't do a lot of primary research. And until the funding, the ITF fund was created, and don't forget that was created by post-1997, and like the R&D center I run didn't come into existence till 2006. So in terms of applied research, we are very, very young, you know. So several hundred years behind, 100 years behind Bell Labs or people like that who are good at these types of research. And I think we are not well equipped for the classical model of success models of places like Bell Labs, where you take 30 years to develop something, and you figure out how to do it, and then you have the patience and the war chest to keep persisting and persevering after something and really get very good at it and get Nobel Prizes for it. When I took over this R&D center 3 years ago, one of the first questions I asked after sifting through a week's worth of, my associates here will remember that, sifting through all these piles and piles of research projects that we have funded and engaged in, I asked the question, how many projects have failed? And very proudly, I was told by my research team, none. Wow. Therein lies the problem, right? We're not good at dealing with things that are high risk, perhaps high return. But this morning, a live example without going into all the details, this morning we sat with a major cutting edge American company, brand. If I tell you who it is, you probably all know who it is. The chief executive, number 2 of the team, was asked by the CEO to come meet with us in Hong Kong, and he brought with his entire science team, and he called together his key Japanese supplier, his key Taiwan suppliers, both world-class name brand suppliers who are very cutting edge in their own right, who owns more intellectual property than we will own in 100 years. And we sat down and we in Hong Kong pulled together a project that uses intellectual property from China, from the United States, from research results coming out of Japan, applying, borrowing all sorts of technologies from adjacent industries, and putting together a project that could not possibly happen. That could not possibly happen without our intervention. And what role and what value do we create in this? Is we are the people who put everything together. We probably did not invent any of the technologies that are on. Say we didn't invent any of the science. But some of these things are 10 years old. And some of the universities and research centers that we deal with have no way to market. They just can't figure out how to make this thing useful. It's intellectually satisfying, but that's about all that they can do with it. And so it falls to us in Hong Kong to make this disruptive technology possible by pulling together all the commercial partners, the science partners, and pulling together and the legal framework around how do we protect this, how do we make sure this works, how do we share the benefits of this, what does the business plan look like. I think those are the types of cool things that we can all get involved in that make sense. And if you think about it, that's what made Hong Kong 50 years ago. A bunch of guys pulling in goods and services that couldn't be otherwise possible. So it's just another form of doing that. And I think it is. I can't help but be optimistic, walking away from an experience like that I had this morning. That we shouldn't be like Silicon Valley. We shouldn't be like Singapore. We shouldn't aspire to be like China. We should be something different, and we probably should be something better.
Okay. Rosana, you want to offer some comments?
In terms of Shenzhen, I have 3D2 sectors in Shenzhen. First of all, one is support center, doing a lot of like 2D drawings that we need, or taking offs in our industry. The second sector is actually my original, the very first IT software company. Actually, we have an office in Shenzhen as well as we are the first developer contractor, have opened up the first P-class plant in Shenzhen. Now we have a second one in Huizhou. Now with these 3 sectors there, within our corporation, I can only say we have about 4,500 people among us. Some of the most creative people we found still actually based in Hong Kong. And the creative collaboration that we have is actually not only just in Hong Kong. We work with people internationally to come up with our R&D, our own innovations. For instance, I mentioned about our hotel in Hong Kong. Not only we are the greenest hotel in the world, plus we have a lot of R&D that we work within our group together with some manufacturing, not just in China, but in our other regions too. For instance, we have developed something called iFanCon, Intelligent FanCon Units. This FanCon unit, if you replace it with the conventional one, immediately on average, you can save more than 80% of energy. Now, those are the high coefficient hardware I'm talking about earlier, and those are actually like one of our startups within our group. And these are basically rather different in comparison to the traditional subsidiaries that we have. The major difference is these startups that we have are very, very creative. We're very innovative. We're all driven by technology. Now that is one company, one startup we formed through this project that we have in our hotel. The second one is actually the optimization solutions that we have with the software enhancement, we push the energy saving even further. Now again, that is the second startup we sort of incubated within the last 2 or 3 years within our group. And the latest one is actually what we call global virtual design construction. We practically bring in not only from 2D drawings to 3D to 5D, it's the whole full lifecycle management. We can actually enhance it. So basically we're helping developer or building owners to look into what they've been actually doing and keep tracking all the data and move on to the next project as well. And all this, we literally not only certain portion we develop and localize ourselves, but we also work with people internationally. And that is quite unique on its own. Now these 3 startups that we have, and we just only spent the past 2 or 3 years in Hong Kong, created in Hong Kong. And we're serving not just for our group, but now for other building owners. We also help bringing this outside of Hong Kong as well. I exported this to Singapore, to Malaysia. Now we're talking about APAC countries. Now that is something that we all can do in here in a much faster way. But it's a way that is not just copying Silicon Valley, but something that we have in here in Hong Kong. Because we're a very small place, we're lean and smart. We all can work together and make it happen. Well, that's little sharing from our case, really. So it's not as doom and gloom as one seems, really. If you really look into these, deeper perhaps, that's from a sort of perhaps from a business angle, in comparison to academia level, maybe it's different from your point of view.
Okay, and David, you want to
Dr. Lowe, or Wai Shen, a very good friend of mine, asked a very good question. But I'd also like to draw our attention to the fact that part of your observation is in fact based on the rising tide of Chinese economy and the Chinese unified domestic market, which I compare to the 1930s, 1920s and 1930s, right after automobiles were created. The US, for the first time, built a national highway infrastructure. And all of a sudden, for the first time, we created a huge, unified and easily accessible national marketplace. And then all kinds of innovations found out that they could actually just do a teeny little bit of innovation and then copy it 1,000 times, and boom, you have huge businesses. McDonald's was literally founded that way. Kentucky Fried Chicken, all the franchise operations. And similarly in China, if you look at the biggest technology players these days, well, I'm sorry, but Baidu didn't really, innovate a whole lot. They basically copied the same idea, and Alibaba certainly did not innovate a whole lot. Tencent, Legend, you just go down the list. As a matter of fact, I've looked at a couple of very innovative internet-based ideas in the past few years, and when other people ask, well, why don't these ideas already have their existence in China? My answer is because these are different ideas, and nobody has done it successfully in the US. Otherwise, it would have been copied by the Chinese. So in other words, I think that the fact that Shenzhen started from almost zero to where it is today, much of that is not really thanks to any particularly unique, innovative ingredients in Shenzhen per se, but it's really a situation where a rising tide carries all boats. And therefore, and also remember, when you start from a very, very low starting point, statistically, if you want to argue, wow, Shenzhen economy has probably created how many times, it will have to be a numerical miracle. Whereas in the case of Hong Kong, we started pretty high already. So how to enhance it for another 10% is a challenge. But having said that, I also fully agree with a number of points raised here. To give you one similar data point, I think the risk is that Hong Kong young people have begun not to want to take major risks. And I've heard, especially on campus, I heard repeatedly a lot of my teaching colleagues being frustrated that when they asked young engineering major students, why did you pick engineering as a major? The answer typically is, I got bad grades. Which is really sad for any professor to hear. So you're stuck with me because you got bad grades. Thank you so much. There are also people pointing to the fact that, for instance, in the Japanese economy, certainly it was true throughout the 1990s, the best high school graduates were going to finance, or the best university graduates would want to work for the Ministry of Finance in Japan, which is probably the least innovative place, I wouldn't say on earth, but certainly not ranked very high. So there is a small issue, I think, that we need to encourage young people to be willing to take more risk and try to learn how to fail and fail fast and be able to rebound from your failure, learn from your failure, and then repeat the process. And that is something that we could use more of. And finally, I think Rosana actually pointed out quite nicely. My experience at Stanford doing technology licensing is actually very different from the common perception outside. A lot of times people are really surprised that Stanford technologies, in terms of licensing contracts that they sign every year, for every single deal that they sign with a young startup, they actually conclude more than 9 deals. So it's a 10-to-1, almost a 9-to-1 ratio. They deal most likely with large established companies who want innovations, who actually can effectively manage innovations. So I think sometimes that people tend to be a little bit misled by the wonderful and very sensational startup stories of going from zero to Google also was born out of Stanford, and it licensed the technology from Stanford. Of course, it was Larry Page had his own PhD thesis, but nevertheless. But people tend to focus on the extreme, the few successful cases, and they forget that actually if you look at the statistical distribution, it's more the larger established companies who manage to understand how to use leading technologies effectively that can actually push the innovation revolution forward. So I think that when we look at the innovation and the innovation contribution to the society, let's not forget that, and don't put all of your energy on the startups and counting the number of startups and stuff like that. And, we should probably look at the overall picture. Thanks.
Okay, great answer. One final question. Anybody? You got the last one. Start on time, end on time.
I don't deserve the last, but I'm interested in your sources of information or sources of knowledge, particularly magazines. Okay, I'm not really interested in books because they have their agenda. By the time they're published, they're 5 years out of date. And newspapers, well, anyway. I want to know what maybe are your top 2 titles of magazines that you read for reliable knowledge when you make a business decision or non-business decision. Okay, magazine titles, preferably in English.
Magazines. Okay. All right, Michael.
The answer is none. I get my information from personal sources, personal interaction. Magazines are not any better than the newspapers as far as I'm concerned.
No magazine journal you would recommend?
Economist.
No, The Economist does
I
a
still
good.
read The Economist.
I always thought The Economist did a really good job on areas that I didn't know about,
Yeah.
and a really not so good job on areas that I knew about. And as I learned, and as I traveled more and more, I had less and
Well, I
and
spent
less
12 years
respect.
with them, so I'm still
For news purposes, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, and then the internet, the leading newspaper of the relevant country.
You don't feel magazine journalism is at a higher standard?
No, I don't feel there's anything that
Not
I
today.
can get in a magazine that I can't much better put together myself from the huge variety of primary information sources that we have.
Amen. Yeah, I agree with it.
The periodicals and even professional journals tend to be a bit dated when you receive them in print copy. And that's probably where they're going to ultimately be short-lived. I think we can get through a design conference and get more out of the interaction we have with other professionals than we can looking at their work in print form, for example.
I think it's the velocity. When you think of the velocity of information and data and how fast they get outdated, and therefore sort of the way we look at magazines as in the internet age is just too slow to keep up with the pace.
Yeah. Rosana? Same? Okay.
At the risk of sounding a little bit arrogant, I suppose, especially when it comes to technology sector coverage, I have found most of the journalism rather disappointing. Just yesterday, I was talking to a reporter friend of mine, and she wanted to know if I had any examples, and so I gave her a couple really bad examples. Because typically, even professional journalists working for very credible general purpose magazines, I'm certainly not talking about the peer review academic journals, but the general purpose magazine journalists, they don't have enough depth in any particular technology area, which will be really unfair to ask of them, truly. Because relative to the people that want to, promote their new discoveries, the journalists have very little tools in their repertoire and even when you ask the question, who could provide a really balanced counterpoint to this person that I'm interviewing, I can imagine that if I were the journalist, it would be really hard. I will probably end up asking the person I'm interviewing, who could provide, and guess how objective their point might be. So I think if you count all the number of magazine articles with a title such as "Another Cure for Cancer" over the years, we should have been done with cancer many years ago. We're not even close. So that to me, it's very disturbing in some sense, and I don't have a solution to that. So I tend to agree with a number of my colleagues here. I tend to just glance at quite a few different, very diverse sources, and I try to and maintain a highly skeptical mind when I read those pieces. But they're excellent starting points. But you have to do your own digging.
So do you read a professional journal yourself?
A professional, you mean?
Yeah, within your profession.
Do you read a professional journal yourself?
Not really. I just try to read up as much as I can. And mostly online.
Yeah,
mostly online. And I usually try to read the first few sentences to see if there's anything. And if there's anything interesting, I will actually try to find another source for the same topic.
I mean, in the design
industry,
if I could just add, in the design industry, just to give it a little bit more credit, I mean, periodicals and professional journals are still important. I think the value in the design industry is that they record benchmarks. Not necessarily they don't necessarily foster innovative thinking. They really are good records of accomplishments that certain people have made over the years, even in the technology industry as well. I used to be a nut over reading Scientific American magazine. Why? I mean, I was a science student, but my bent was architectural design. But it was a beautiful magazine, and I didn't even know if it was really true what I was reading. I know that all of that material gets edited, and I think that's part of the problem, is that in any periodical or any publication, even regardless of who they've interviewed, there's always an editing process that becomes a filter and a barrier between you and reality, and that is one of the problems. But when it comes to looking back in history, great ways of reporting benchmarks in our profession.
Okay, Michael, you can have
Yeah,
a
just
final word.
one other comment, and that is, when I'm looking, there are a number of specific technology areas that I follow, but I don't follow those by looking even at newspapers. I follow those by reading patent abstracts. There is so much information available that if you decide that you want to be looking for X, there are ways of very efficiently finding and searching the raw stuff. So for the 4 or 5 technology areas that I follow for clients, for investors, etc., I just go to the patent abstracts. I can tell within the first paragraph whether it's of interest to me. If it is, I read the rest of it. If it's really interesting, then I have the people that I need to get in touch with. So
Okay. Okay, on that note, we're going to have to end this session. If you could just take 30 seconds and fill in the event survey and hand it back at the registration desk. This is our final session of 8 briefings that we've done in partnership with Hong Kong Science and Technology Parks. Next year, we're going to do these in the evening. The theme is going to be Hong Kong and the new economy. And hopefully we'll get the Jack Ma's and Paul Fields of the world that have similar dialogues. But they'll be in the evening with cocktails, and Google will be sponsoring all of that. This was a fun panel. I love panels. And if you could just join me in thanking them for the traditional way. Enjoy the weekend, and thank you for your time. Take care.